accueillons Madame Majanet et Madame Van Kemelen. Bonjour. Bonjour. Qui représentent la société Columbia Care.
Are we ready?
Yes, we can start and then we ask you some questions.
So I apologize that I will be speaking in English and not in French, and you would be happy for that, because if I spoke in French, you would be very unhappy. I am the Chief Science Officer for Columbia Care. I'm trained as an oncologist hematologist in the Harvard hospitals, and I have been in drug development and the financing of biotechnology companies for the last 25 years. I joined Columbia Care initially in 2013 when they first started having clinics. They were in 3 states then, and I realized the potential to collect data and make a difference in people's lives. More recently, in 2016, I joined the company more formally as the Chief Science Officer. I'm here with Eveline, who is my colleague, who is a French regulatory expert with regard to medicines and cannabis at this point, what is known about cannabis, and she will be helping me translate things if need be. So again, Columbia Care is really a US-based company. We just went public on the Canadian Stock Exchange because cannabis growth and manufacture and sale in the United States is illegal. We are not able to bank or list on the stock exchange in the United States. So that is why we are listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange. Because of that, I have to have a safe harbor statement, which means that anything I say today should not be used for any trading purposes. So Columbia Care overview. We have been around, as I mentioned, since 2013. We have more than 35 government licenses issued in the US and the EU. We're reaching more than 50% of the United States population by being in 14 states. We have 54 facilities open and running by the end of fiscal year this year. We have 730,000 square feet of cultivation potential in the United States. We can reach 100% if you look at the bottom of the US population with CBD. And over on the far bottom right, we have more than 1 million successful patient interactions since 2013. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. So we believe that we're the experts in medical cannabis and cannabinoid-based medicines in the United States. If you look at the map of the United States, you can see that we're in many, again, states now selling. We're going into additional states, and we have plans to expand into even other states. We also have plans to expand into Europe with our pharmaceutical-based products. If you look at the right, you can see that we have a GMP fill and finish line, the same as you would see in any pharmaceutical plant. And this is the type of pharmaceutical products that we would plan to bring to France were we granted licenses here. The bottom is really a very important point. Columbia Care has assembled a database of every patient customer of medical cannabis that we've treated. And it's one of the largest and most detailed longitudinal databases in the world. What we've done is we've taken each US state has its own regulations about how they will allow for the growth, manufacture, and sale of cannabis, but they all have one uniting feature, and that is that they track from seed to sale to prevent diversion. So what is known about the patient is their demographics, their qualifying condition, how often they buy cannabis products, exactly what they buy, and this is all known, and we have to have this in a HIPAA-compliant database for each state. So now we have actually put all 14 states together, and what we have is more than 1 million patient interactions that are fully curated, with many with pharmacist documentation of AEs and patient problems, and we have that available for analysis. Basically, we are working with people at Stanford University. We look at every patient interaction as one of three things. A patient can decide to buy the same thing, buy something different, or not buy anything at all. And when you look at it that way, and you look at their demographics, their qualifying condition, the condition for which they were prescribed cannabis, and we can even look at the minor cannabinoids that are in our products, we can come to some interesting conclusions with all of that data about what might work best for people. I think it's important to point out at this point that all of the medications that I'm talking about in the United States are being purchased by patients. There is no reimbursement, and we'll talk about the pricing of that in a minute. But the fact that patients are spending their own money to buy these products is what gives us some confidence that what we're looking at with regard to what they buy consistently over time or what they choose to stop is giving us some indication of whether this is working for them or not. So as you are probably aware, every United States state that allows medical cannabis is different in the way it regulates it. I have listed the features here that are different in different states, and I would just like to comment on the things that we think are important. Our New York state operations are really the model for what we would like to do in the rest of the world. They're the most regulated. There is a requirement for physician training. There's the requirement for the presence of a dispensing pharmacist, requirement for the qualifying condition. That's one of the state-approved conditions. The amount of product dispensed every 30 days and how refills will be handled is particularly defined. We think that's very helpful. Most importantly, we think the products need to be dosable. For all of our formulations that I'm going to show you, we know exactly what the dose of THC, CBD, and even some minor cannabinoids are in a milligram per ounce, tab, or a pump. We really are not in the business of selling flower or edibles for medical cannabis. We think that the dosing there is very difficult, and the products are really not very clearly delineated in the United States. Some states only allow low THC products, and most states have a THC maximum dose of 10 milligrams. No one goes above 10 milligrams of THC in any dosage formulation. Going down the list again, some states have GMP or GMP-like requirements and others don't. We're always looking to be as GMP compliant as we can. We think looking at safety for contaminants and accuracy of cannabinoid content is very important. And actually, in our New York operations, we have a batch release by a third-party lab. So the same way a pharmaceutical company would. When we talk about pricing, it's really very different in each state. And I'll explain, and I'm sure that you would understand that the cost of goods is very different when I'm talking about all of these different requirements. So I can tell you that in the most regulated place where we are, again, New York, the average cost would be between $150 and $300 a month for a patient with peripheral neuropathy, for example, who was in their 50s. The average patient in New York is actually a woman in her 50s. States are a little bit different. In Massachusetts, it's a 40-year-old man. In Arizona, it might be a 30-year-old. But in the more regulated states, we're really seeing real patients. I'm sure you know some of this information, but I always like to take the chance to go through it again because it's really unbelievable. This is just to show from Israel some data that was compiled a while ago of the same seed lot of plant. And again, this is the same greenhouse mother plant, so they have the same genotype. The rows are each cannabinoid measured. Again, it's a heat map, so the darkness is the amount, and the columns are 4 sequential quarters. So what we can see is if you look at CBD, you can see that there's one quarter where there really isn't very much. You wouldn't know that unless you measured it because you're assuming that this strain would always be the same. And CBDV also has one quarter where it's almost entirely missing. So for this reason, we don't focus on flower. We focus on extract, where you can actually measure what's in it, and you can also have a product that is the same thing every time. Consistency is very important. How we maintain the consistency is that we add back. So if we have a product lot that we know has too much of certain cannabinoids, we will extract some of that to have always the same amount. If we're missing some, we will add it back. So we're really focused not on what was in the product to begin with, but what is in the product when it's dispensed to the patient, so they always have the same product. By the same token, you know, we group these in groupings of cannabinoids that tend to go together. We believe that the biosynthesis platforms are unable to meet non-GMO and the diversity of desired cannabinoid profiles. So we're not focusing at this time on biosynthesis platforms at all. I'm sure everybody in the room knows that drug delivery types for unit dosable products will result in different absorption and length of action. So again, this varies in different states because the products can be different. I'm talking about the products that we consider our pharma products that we're going to launch in Europe. And again, inhalation is the quickest. People like to use that for breakthrough pain. We don't believe in smoking as much as we can avoid it. We believe that it exposes patients to unnecessary risks. So we actually have vaporizers that we sell with our cartridges that use what we believe is the safest way to deliver the product. It's the same mechanism that's used by pharma companies in inhalers, for example. Our oral formulations have been very popular, particularly our tablets that have a long duration of action. We're now expanding that to also have enteric coating so that we don't have liver metabolism, because we believe that having enteric coating will stop a lot of the metabolism that takes a lot of the CBD and turns it into other compounds that might not be as useful. The sublingual tinctures have been around for a long time. We find that people are not using those as much as they used to. And transdermal is very difficult to determine what we're actually delivering in the transdermal setting, but we're continuing to try as we roll out those products. We're using excipients in the transdermal, obviously, to try to carry some of the molecules into the skin. So in summary, this is just to show you what our products actually were designed to be. They're designed to be in units for dosing, have consistent API content and excipients in every dose, be made in formats to have different times to action and usage features so that all patients and their symptoms can be treated. The available formats are listed here. And again, you know, we find that many patients in New York enjoy using all of these different types of formats at different times of the day and in different situations. However, you know, obviously on a country-by-country basis, they could be limited to just a few products. The diverse formulations, we now just have things that are THC high, equal, or CBD high, and a CBD ultra high. And the reason is, again, we had a lot of products when we first launched in New York in 2016. We had a 5-to-1, a 1-to-5, a 2-to-1, a 1-to-2. And what we found was that really people were looking for something that was THC high, CBD high, or in the middle. And so we've actually trimmed back to just have these. They have names, okay? We have Theraseed, Eliseed, Clariseed, because the minor cannabinoids are also very important to us, and these names have been trademarked because there's patents filed on the minor cannabinoids that are also in all of these formulations. The high CBD, the ultra high CBD, Clariseed Ultra, is a formulation that we've made more recently. Actually, Rnd Initiatives, who was responsible for the Epidiolex trials, he was the principal investigator, had asked us to make this for him. He is doing a trial in children in upstate New York who were institutionalized with epilepsy from all reasons, not just the 2 syndromes that Epidiolex studied. And he wanted to have a full spectrum product that did have a minor amount of, a trace, if you will, of THC and other cannabinoids as well. So we have that product available. So if you want to look at the whole product profile with all the formulations in all the dosage strengths, this is what it looks like. Again, all of the packaging is very compliant with all regulations. It includes some dosing comments and also some side effect comments. We also have pharmacovigilance, so obviously all of the phone numbers for all of those programs are listed as well. So I thought it would be interesting if I showed you some of the data that we're able to look at from our patient database. So this is just sort of illustrative. What we find is that state governments, when we go to look at states, always are asking us what we see in some of our other states with regard to dosing and what people are taking for what conditions. We've supplied a lot of this data actually to the government in the UK as well. So what we can tell you is that in New York, when we look between January, when we open, and May, most recently, we can see that chronic pain is certainly the most common indication. Neuropathy, cancer, inflammatory bowel disease, spinal cord injuries, PTSD, multiple sclerosis then follow. And some of the things are in very, very minor amounts, as you can see. Cancer, in this particular slide, I apologize, we haven't broken it out between cancer pain and cancer nausea, vomiting, but I can tell you that this isn't neuropathy in this cancer number. We obviously could make that a much finer cut. Just to give you another indication of where we can look a little bit more deeply into the database is in the geriatric patient population. This is a population we're all very concerned about for safety. Okay, the last thing we want is to increase falls or increase any adverse events in this patient group. So it's useful to us to know what patients in this group over 70 have as their qualifying conditions and what they're taking most commonly. What we can see is that people do like Theraceed, which is the THC high, for a number of conditions, including chronic pain, neuropathy, and PTSD. But for many of the other indications, they like an equal or a CBD-heavy type of situation. And again, we follow these patients for safety profiles fairly seriously. We're always asked about dosing recommendations. Again, what I can tell you is what people buy, what physicians will write as a prescription and people will buy. And so what we see here is the comparison of what people over 70 with neuropathy buy as their first prescription versus their most recent prescription by quartile. And we've broken it into CBD and THC. So again, this gives us some idea of where patients end up titrating their doses and what might be the most useful way to have patient dosing guidelines that will be helpful to patients and physicians to have some illustration of what might work. I just want to briefly go over our ongoing R&D initiatives. I mentioned that we have a lot of CGMP products that have been developed or in additional development, and those are over on the left. Again, we are putting a lot of our tablets into an enteric-coated formulation as well. Beniseed is a tablet that we're just making now. It's going to be a high-dose CBD tablet, a 200 milligram, and that's actually a product that we're making for the first thing in the middle column, the IRB-approved clinical research programs. We're doing a phase 3 randomized control trial for FDA and EMA approval out of King's College London for schizophrenia. So we are making Beniseed particularly at the request of the NIHR in the UK, who came to us initially about making this formulation for a psychosis trial. And we're going to be making it now for 3 large trials they're doing as part of a large program that's funded by the Wellcome Trust. So that will be, again, in 5 countries, and we're very excited about that. Because in the United States, we are not allowed to have we have difficulty with the FDA in being able to do any trials without a formal IND being assembled and submitted. Because these are combination drugs, that's very difficult for us. So it's easier for countries outside the United States to do research in the United States than for companies inside the United States to do research inside the United States. So inside the United States, we really can only do pre- and post-observational trials. As I mentioned earlier, we're doing an epilepsy trial at the Center for Discovery with Dr. Rnd in epilepsy from all comers. Again, these are people with very severe seizure disorders. We're doing a very large opioid reduction trial. We're going to start that in New York, and that will go into 6 additional states. We're doing sickle cell pain, and we have a vape cartridge that we're going to be doing some trials with as well. That is guided by physicians. The patient can only take what the physician will allow the cartridge to administer. We have a lot of observational studies, patient-reported outcomes. But as we know, those can be published, but they're not terribly convincing. We believe that our pre- and post-observational studies, where the patients have been curated very carefully with regard to their symptoms before they start the intervention, might be more convincing. I just want to mention we have clinical sites in Los Angeles and geriatrics that we're going to start studying soon. Our intent was never to go into states that were recreational. Again, we're really very medically focused. We are going into California. I think our dispensary in San Diego has just opened. And part of the reason is because we have been asked specifically by UCLA, by UCSD, by Stanford University, and by Mount Sinai Hospital to please bring formulated products to California, because their patients don't really want to buy what Snoop Dogg is selling today. So, this has been a fabulous opportunity for us because there are no formulated dosable products in the state of California for real doctors to prescribe for real patients. So we're excited about going there. On the far right, I talk a little bit about our data mining. I mentioned we have a very large data set. We have an opioid reduction and substitution trial. I'll talk about that on the next slide a little bit more. We have the large study that we're going to be doing, Montefiore, Albert Einstein College of Medicine, that is the opioid reduction. We have some pharmacogenomic studies that we're doing to determine who are the interesting things we can learn about the patients who are taking very high doses of drug or very low doses of drug to achieve a therapeutic effect. And we're also working with Rand Corporation in Santa Monica. Massachusetts went rec while we were there with medical products, so we're looking at what determines which patients might switch to go to medical product or to go to recreational products for medical products. I just want to mention our pilot data from our opioid situation has really been very important. We, in New York, realized that all controlled substances are put into the same database. It's called a pharmacy manual or a pharmacy management program. Each state actually has one of these. It's a law enforcement tool initially, but each physician, as they write for an opioid, a benzodiazepine, or a cannabinoid, is asked to put data on that patient into a database. And actually, each refill, when the patient goes to the pharmacist, has to be inserted. So this is a very serious state-regulated database. And what we started doing was looking at patients who were on opioids when they started on cannabis. And we just did a natural history. We didn't ask those patients if they were trying to reduce their opioids or not, but what we learned was of the patients with peripheral neuropathy, which was the largest component of patients back when we started, 62% of those patients over the next 9 months reduced, stabilized, reduced, or eliminated their opioid prescriptions. And we thought that that was really quite amazing. The interesting thing is that their THC did not go up a lot. The median THC was still 10 milligrams a day. So that data was analyzed and sent by Columbia University, which has no relationship to us, to our NIH in Washington, and Washington gave them an R21 grant to do a bigger trial to come back and mine our data set. And that is what's leading us to do a larger trial. We're doing a 50,000 patient observational trial led by Montefiore Albert Einstein to look and see, again, based on this pharmacy management tool, how many patients are reducing their opioid prescriptions. So our methods and practice that we think make us unique is our abilities to operate and educate. We have a lot of product formats and formulations, and we're happy to discuss the properties of all of those. We have facility licensing and operations that go through many models. We have in some states a clinic provider-based model, and we have a facility provider joint model. We have data analytics and data collection. And again, we have 6 years of data in many situations, longitudinal for patients. We are quite compliant. We've never really had problems with any of our states. We are good citizens in all geographies. The research that we do is IRB review and approved. And again, we're very happy to be in situations where we're going to be doing global trials. We are very big components of making sure risk mitigation and adverse event monitoring is done at all times. Again, we've had pharmacovigilance monitoring since 2016. We have a 24-hour hotline where people can call and talk to a doctor. And again, we have CME training and development where we're making modules that are being incorporated into many hospitals' plans. Our vision for Europe is, we would really like to be a very respected producer of cannabis and derivative medicines. We want to be the preferred global partner for clinical trials. We want to be a leader in innovation and data collection for cannabis-derived medicines, medically oriented pan-European distribution and network, and again, all with strict local compliance and regulatory control. Just to show you what we're doing in other countries right now in Europe, we have a German advisory board as we're preparing to go into Germany. And we're actually planning to do some trials with Dr. Mueller-Wahl in autism in the very near future. And the UK activities, I've been a presenter for the all-party parliamentary group for a number of times. And we're charter members of the Cannabis Medical Council in London. And as I mentioned, we have 3 planned randomized controlled trials with Professor McGuire at King's College London. So with that, I will conclude, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions? Serge Perrault.
A question on the switch from medical cannabis to recreational cannabis. Did you give any data on that, on the switch? How many patients switched from medical cannabis to recreational cannabis? Do you have any data on that? You spoke about that?
No, we're doing that with Rand.
Okay.
Right.
But you don't have the results?
We don't. It's being collected now. What I can tell you is that in each state that has gone recreational, it's taken a very long time for sales to actually happen. So it had been delayed a while. It's only really since, I think, November where sales have been have started in any of the recreational facilities. But, it's very interesting. There are taxation situations, and there are also the amount of product that one can get at any one time. That if somebody really did the math, they would understand it's much more economical for them to stay with their medical product. So, but we'll see what happens. That was the point, to do a study to see what the natural history is.
And a second question, you have different dosages, and do the patients still remain on the same dosage, or are there some switches to different dosages?
What I would like to confine my comments is to New York. New York, anytime there's a change in dosage, the pharmacist has to tell the physician, and the physician has to allow it. So when the titration that I mentioned in showing the differences from the first prescription to the most recent prescription for each THC and CBD, those were all sanctioned by a physician. The patient cannot make that decision themselves.
In one of your slides, you discuss the use of cannabinoid for patients having peripheral neuropathy, and you indicate that two-thirds of the patients reduce opioid prescription. But what about other prescription? In peripheral neuropathy, pain, we use anti-epileptic drug, as you know. So is it it is the same for other medication than opioid? Do you reduce the usage of anti-epileptic drug in this particular patient having peripheral neuropathy?
I wish I could answer your question to your satisfaction. What I can tell you is that we have great confidence in the opioid data because it's coming from that state-mandated database, okay, where it's a criminal offense if anyone buys an opioid and a pharmacist does not put it in, right? So that is very clear. The information that we have about additional medications is patient-reported. So we do have all of that information in a patient electronic medical record that the pharmacist takes when they intake the patient and then on a routine follow-up basis. But that is patient-reported data. And patient-reported data is never as good as the actual medical record. So I can't answer that exactly.
Yes, it is concerning your study about the neuropathic patients. If I understand well, concerning the CBD, between the first prescription and the latest prescription, there is not a lot of change, but concerning the THC, it increased. And do you have this kind of information about other indication, because it is only in the...
We have this for everything. I just did this as, again, we keep this as proprietary information, and this will be publicly available. So I just cut it for geriatrics because I thought that might be of particular interest to show that we have a concern. You know, we look at patient safety a lot, but we have this for all different patient groups. And if you have a particular interest, we're happy to work with you on understanding that. Again, we do this for governments and state governments all the time as they look to make their prescribing recommendations. What I can tell you is that, again, most physicians are not comfortable prescribing a high THC dose for patients over 70 at the beginning. So it's not a surprise that everyone goes up a lot, okay, because, again, there's a lot of careful control at the beginning with starting with a low dose. So it's not surprising, but this is just, again, the point of the slide to show you the titration and then where people end up over time with their most recent prescription.
So that it means that for maybe for other indications, we can see the opposite, CBD increased and THC does not increase, or is it
for inflammatory?
It is always THC that increases.
Well, people do like a little THC, I have to say. What I can tell you is inflammatory bowel disease, for example, people over time increase their CBD a lot. Okay, so there are some conditions where people actually do end up on a higher CBD dose than THC dose. Right.
Well, I think it can be a fundamental information for us. If there is a different kind of use in different kind of indications, that means that we really have to help the prescriptor, to help the patients.
No, we agree. That's why we've collected this data from the beginning, and we frequently cut it and analyze it at the request of people. Yeah.
In line with the question of Laure Coppel, the use in elderly people, more than 70, on the graph, it's clear that you increase quite slowly the dosage of THC. Did you observe in this specific population, elderly people, some bad side effect about confusion, about hallucination, and so on? Reason why you advise the general practitioner or the physician to switch to increase very slowly the dosage with THC.
We do see some side effects. Often it may not be as much due to age, we think, as due to additional medications that the patient is on. So some combination of medications that patients can be on, particularly at that age group, can contribute to it. But you're right, that's why we go up carefully. You know, we do have data with regard to opioid usage, benzodiazepine usage in this population as well. And, you know, the interesting thing is, you know, when we look at this, sometimes we take out the palliative patients. I haven't taken out the palliative patients from this data set. So some of the THC that you're seeing where patients are taking 20 milligrams a day, I have a feeling some of those might be palliative patients, where, you know, it's not as much of a concern that those patients are fine to ambulate and have good mobility because they are often bedridden. But again, those are the types of things that we can easily analyze.
Bashir?
Yeah, thank you. I noticed that you stressed out the fact that you have a huge database of patients and about both safety and efficiency as well. What kind of analysis are you applying to this? Because this requires big data approaches, machine learning, data mining, AI, and because you also mentioned that yourself you had experience in classical pharma groups, how does it compare to the classical clinical trials in terms of information? How can you see that?
Well, I am a bit of a pioneer, I would say, in this field, in that we have decided to take the people who talk about real-world evidence at their word, okay? So my Congress in 2016 passed a bill about the 21st century cures, where they said that FDA would eventually look at real-world evidence and real-world data. So a lot of how we've collected this data has been in compliance with some of the things that Congress had set out at that time. And we're working with the Bustamante lab at Stanford University, which is a very large laboratory, with machine learning to actually just this, to analyze just these types of things. What we're hoping to do, and you know, again, I'm a pioneer, I admit that, you can call me nuts, it's okay. But in some of these patient populations, even these observational trials that we have, we think are going to be very powerful because of some of the things that we've built into the trial design. And my goal is to get third-party payment for some of these patient groups. So right now, for example, in the United States, only those 2 rare conditions where Epidiolex is approved are having Epidiolex reimbursed. There is not reimbursement for all comers of seizures, which is why we're studying patients who have the most common form of resistant epilepsy, which actually is head trauma, or it's birth anoxia, cerebral palsy. So, you know, we're doing those patient groups, and we're doing pharmacoeconomics on that as well to see number of times patients have to go to the hospital, various other things as well, but to try to get some reimbursement for patients in those groups. So we're compiling this data. We don't think that it will ever lead to FDA approval. I understand that. I respect EMA and FDA approval. That's for very particular things. But what we would like to do is have enough data that's undeniable that patients are helped, so that they can have this paid for them. That's my goal.
So do you mean that big data approaches could also be a way to uncover new indications that could be tested through classical clinical trials, for example?
Well, that's part of, excuse me, that's part of what we're doing. There are 2 things. One is to find things where maybe something could be treated better. But the second part is actually to come up with better products. You know, at the beginning of cannabis, you know, people would extract what was in the plant, and that's what they would sell. So you were stuck with what was in that plant. It was a roulette wheel, you know, you were stuck, okay. Now things have grown a bit. And again, as I mentioned, we blend so that you always have, we're concerned not about the plant anymore as much, but what you get at the end of the day that you give to a patient. And even in the recreational space, you know, I say that my 27-year-old son If he wants to have a THC pill to get high, he deserves to have a safe THC pill legally in California if he wants it, right? So it's about having a reproducible, safe product at the end. What we are looking to do, though, is be able to create products that we think are more useful. I may not have stressed this, but the database that we have in most states actually has exactly what cannabinoids, down to at least 6, in some states 12, in each of those strains. So the strain names mean nothing to us. I showed you the heat map. The strain names, it's garbage to me, okay? We have analyzed each of those, and we do it, again, on a batch release, okay? So we know what was in those strains at that time. And when we, for example, want to say, you know, a woman with multiple sclerosis and these symptoms, what would work best for her? You know, eventually when we, you know, we want, again, Stanford University to turn the crank and be able to say what she buys most often on a longitudinal basis is this amount of THC, this amount of CBD, and these minor cannabinoids. This is what she prefers. Again, when she goes in and makes that choice to buy something different, not at all, or the same thing. So that's exactly the type of eye we're putting onto the database, is to be able to convince payers that some patient groups should have their drug paid for because it's helping them and saving money to the system. But also it's to be able to figure out which of the minor cannabinoids, which terpenes, what other factors might be important or not. Maybe they won't be. Maybe we'll learn they're not important. But that's our goal, is to actually be able to answer some of those questions.